thoughts that we will explore today. And a very good person to help us in discussing these particular issues is our first guest, the Honorable Inusah Fuseini. Honorable Inusah A.B. Fuseini is a legal practitioner and a member of the 7th Parliament of the 4th Republic of Ghana, who represented the people of the Tamale Central constituency. He was a Minister of State, originally Lands and Natural Resources, and then later Roads and Highways in the John Dramani Mahama administration between 2013 and 2017. He also served as a Deputy Minister of Energy under the late Professor J.E.A. Mills government between 2010 and January 2013. While in Parliament, Honorable Inusah Fuseini served as the chairman of the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee between 2009 and 2010, and was a ranking member of the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee between 2017 and 2020. He was also a member of the European Union, African, Caribbean and Pacific Joint Parliament Assembly, the European Union and African, Caribbean, Pacific Joint Parliamentary Assembly, the EUACPJPA, from 2009, 2010, and 2017 to 2020. Thank you very much for joining us, Honorable Inusah Fuseini.
Thank you.
May I ask you to go ahead with your presentation on your case for constitutional review? I would particularly like to ask your thoughts on the majority leader's positions on the configuration of our government, how we have filled our offices, and that's its impact on our government system.
Definitely, when you're done with your presentation. So.
Very well, very well, very well.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning. Samson, last week I was at Jimpa to participate in the Jimpa Law Week. And in one of the sessions, a group of young men came out to present a paper. They bemoaned the lack of inclusiveness or the assumption that only people of a certain age can aspire to be president. They felt, and rightly so, that they had been excluded. And they clearly stated and argued that the wisdom to run a country does not reside in the head of older people alone. Now, there's evidence to that because they cited the Danish Prime Minister, they cited our first president and the age at which he was when he became Prime Minister and president. They cited Jerry John Rawlings and his age at the time he led the coup in 1979 and 1982. Now, again, when the majority leader, Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, was presenting his paper, did you look at the demographic spread? Only young guys. The hall was filled with young guys. These young guys feel excluded. And they are those complaining, and rightly so. So let me make my case for constitutional reform. Samson, Ghana's fourth attempt at constitutional democratic rule began, and like everybody knows, on 7th January 1993, when the president and parliament, a president and members of parliament of the First Republic, of the first parliament of the Fourth Republic was sworn into office under the Constitution. That was approved in the national referendum held on 28th of April 1992. The Constitution established a framework of government for Ghana in the hope that the framework shall ensure, and in quote, shall ensure for ourselves, or secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity. In order to realize these aspirations, the 1992 Constitution of Ghana chose as a basic structure a novel system of government, a hybrid. The basic government framework under the 1992 Constitution is a fusion between the presidential system of government as prevails in the United States of America and the Westminster parliamentary system of government as practiced in the United Kingdom. And this has been alluded to by the majority leader. This fusion finds expression in Article 78(1) of the Constitution. Article 78(1) allows the President, in exercise of his executive authority under Article 58 of the Constitution, to choose ministers of state from among members of Parliament, in quotes. The 1992 Constitution also provides for the directive principles of state policy in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. These principles have been said to be guiding principles to guide, quote, to guide all citizens, Parliament, the President, the Judiciary, the Council of State, the Cabinet, political parties, and other bodies and persons in applying and interpreting this Constitution or any other law, and in taking or implementing policy decisions for the establishment of a just and free society. I mean, you can never cease to be amazed at the values that the Constitution prescribes that we should attain. And this is provided for in Article 34(1). It is worth noting that Chapter 6 of the Constitution has been until recently held by the Supreme Court of Ghana not to be justiciable. See the case of Ghana Lotto operators against National Lotto Authority. Our traditional institution, or traditional social institution, the institution of chieftaincy, is dealt with in Chapter 24 and emphasizes in Article 271 that the institution of chieftaincy, together with the traditional councils established by customary law and usage, is hereby guaranteed. So we preserved the institution of chieftaincy under our Constitution. The Constitution also, in Chapter 5, contains an inexhaustible cocktail of rights and freedoms. Inexhaustible. I mean, 33(5) makes those rights inexhaustible. Like all other written constitutions, the 1992 Constitution provides for how it can be amended, because it's a constitution. And that is in Chapter 6. The chapter employs a binary approach to the classification of the provisions of the Constitution. That is, entrenched and non-entrenched provisions. And has prescribed amendment procedures for the different categories, flexible and or rigid. The President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, at a recent swearing in of some board members of the National Commission on Civic Education, is reported to have said that the 1992 Constitution has provided bedrock for the longest uninterrupted, stable period of governance in Ghana, in Ghana's turbulent history. And this is reported in Modern Ghana on the 23rd day of March 2023. And clearly, the Constitution is 30 years old. The longest. The first Republican Constitution, 1960 to 1966, 6 years old, or less than 6 years. The second Republican Constitution under Buzia, less than 2 years old. Or about 2 years old. The third Republican Constitution, the 1979 Constitution under Liban, less than 2 years old. And so this is the longest Constitution, the Constitution that has served as the longest. And so, I mean, we should commend the framers of the Constitution for their foresight in providing us with a Constitution that has secured us some level of stability. Now, according to the report of the Constitutional Review Committee, The 1992 Constitution is a resilient foundation for good governance in Ghana. It has been the basis for the flourishing institutions under the Fourth Republic and has potential of guiding the evolution of the nation's institutions towards peace, prosperity, and a good life for the people, for its people. Under the Constitution, 5 and now 8. When they were writing, it was 5. Now 8 successful presidential and parliamentary elections have been conducted. 2, now 3 of them involving a transfer of power from a ruling party to an opposition party. However, the Commission finds, and this was a finding, the Commission finds that there are many areas of the Constitution and of constitutional practice that need to change for the better. Note that. I'll come back to it. And this is found in page 3, at page 3 of the report. One can therefore conclude that the 1992 Constitution has delivered political stability as compared to previous constitutions. The question is, has the 1992 Constitution delivered the promise of good life, prosperity, and development? Has it been able to deal with the ills of maladministration, corruption, wastage, and recklessness in the use of public resources? Has it delivered on the promise of equality of opportunities as promised in the preamble of the Constitution? Recently, at a meeting organized by the African Center for Economic Transformation in collaboration with the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs at the Marriott Hotel, Accra, I stated that constitutions in democratic settings are designed to check the exercise of power or authority by duty bearers. By establishing rules, institutions, structures, procedures, processes, standards, and so on, which regulate the exercise of authority of public office holders. Consequently, in the 1992 Constitution, there are substantive, procedural, and institutional limitations imposed on duty bearers in the exercise of their authority. This is the essence, or ought to be the essence, of constitutionalism: checks and balances. It therefore goes without saying that where the rules, institutions, structures, procedures, processes are weak and corrupt, the Constitution might not be able or will not be able to deliver on the democratic dividend, to wit, prosperity and development. This might explain why this committee, the Constitution Review Commission, titled their report thus, "From a Political to a Developmental Constitution." This is why I make a case for constitutional reform, to tighten the loose ends, to make our institutions responsive and responsible, to make our government more accountable, to insulate our institutions against partisan political manipulation, to fight corruption, and to enhance trust through transparency. Intufo, an Attorney General, reported in the 1980 Ghana Law Report at page 637. Sowaje, as he then was, speaking for the court at page 647, stated that a written constitution such as ours is not an ordinary act of parliament. It embodies the will of the people. It mirrors his history. He goes on to conclude, it contains within it aspirations and hopes for a better and fuller life. It contains within it their aspirations and hopes for a better and fuller life. I must hasten to add that I am not unaware of the existence of views of other people who think and believe that the Constitution, being a living document capable of growth, coupled with the fact that constitutions are normally skeletal frameworks, it should be left to the province of the courts to provide the ingredients that will ensure its growth through the utilization of the interpretative jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The chief proponent of this view appears to me, in my humble view, to be the President of the Republic of Ghana, who has cautioned campaigners for constitutional reforms to hasten slowly. Festina lente, he says. The President did not, however, make haste slowly when he decided to appoint a record number of judges to the apex court of the land, even in the face of an existing caution by the African Peer Review Committee against packing the courts. And I just heard Mensah Bonsu say that, ask a question, can we trust our Supreme Court, our courts? Moreover, the recent reversal of the Supreme Court of the United States of America of the decision in Roe and Wade does not give campaigners like myself comfort. It is my considered view that a political solution to the perceived weakness of the Constitution is the way to go. So there is the need to trigger Chapter 25 of the 1992 Constitution. I therefore vote for constitutional reform. To conclude, my people in Dabong, the Dogombes, have a saying which loosely translates thus: the fact that you cannot do all, you cannot accomplish all, should not prevent you, should not stop you from doing some, from accomplishing some. Thus, if a total overhaul, as canvassed by the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, is not possible or will be difficult to accomplish, there are some provisions of the Constitution which are literally asking to be amended, and I will shortly proceed to set them forth. Article 43 of the Constitution and 44 of the Constitution deal with the Electoral Commission. Now, the Electoral Commission is appointed by the President on the advice of the Council of State. The Electoral Commission is a public office. The appointment on the advice of the appointment of the President on the advice of the Council of State has resulted in trust deficits for the Electoral Commission. I believe that we can cure this, and we should cure it. We should cure it by amending Article 43 of the Constitution to read: the Electoral Commission shall be appointed by the President on the advice of the Public Services Commission with the prior approval of Parliament by a 2/3 majority. So what do you have here? You have properly located the Electoral Commission, which is a public office by creation, within the Public Services Commission. And it's not new, it's not novel. When Kenya was confronted with the situation of an Electoral Commission they could trust, they gave that responsibility to the Public Services Commission, who caused publications to be made, adverts to be made, inviting applications for the post of, an Electoral Commission of Kenya. And interviews were conducted. Now, the two-thirds majority requirement inserted by my proposal will also ensure that we have a bipartisan consensus in Parliament. We have a bipartisan consensus in Parliament. Lack of bipartisan consensus has been the bane of the attempted or aborted amendments that have come before Parliament. Now, Article 44 of the Constitution, which is also on the Electoral Commission, just puts the commissioner and the deputy on terms, similar to a judge of the Court of Appeal. Similar to the judge of the Court of Appeal. And so, I propose that there should be a term limit for the Electoral Commission. Now, for the amendment of the Electoral Commission to be a public office, you can look at Article 70 as well. If Article 70, because Article 70 establishes public offices, you can amend the Electoral Commission. It establishes the Council of State. You can amend the Council of State to read Public Services Commission. Instead of the president appointing on the advice of the Council of State, the president should appoint on the advice of the Public Services Commission. And the Public Services Commission will institute procedures. Now, appointment of justices to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, Article 1281 of the Constitution is not an entrenched provision. It's not an entrenched provision. And so, my recommendation is to put a cap on the number of appointments a president can make to the Supreme Court at any given time. And I think that that cap should be between 12 and 15. Now, it appears to me that Articles 142 to 144 on the regional tribunals should be deleted because it has fallen into disuse. We don't have regional tribunals. Meanwhile, it is in our Constitution. Now, I'm just wrapping up. Now, we have Article 78(1), which deals with appointment by the president from among members of Parliament a majority of which must come from Parliament. My view is that that should be amended. And that should be amended to exclude appointment from members of Parliament, by the president of members of Parliament to be ministers of state. And there should be a cap on the number of ministers the president can appoint. And that is Article 78(2) ought to be amended. Article 71 should be deleted in its entirety because it appears to me to conflict, to be inconsistent, not conflict, to be inconsistent with Article 17 of the Constitution, which deals with non-discrimination. Both officers under Article 71 and are public officers. All officers under Article 71 are public officers. And so there should not be discrimination between Article 71 office holders and all other office holders. So I think that the Independent Emolument Committee, as recommended by the Constitution Review Committee, should be looked at and substituted for the arrangement in Article 71.
Okay.
And lastly, all heads of independent constitutional bodies should be appointed through a process put in place by the Public Services Commission with prior approval of two-thirds majority from Parliament. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fuseini. You have made some really interesting points, and I wish we had all the time in the world to delve into some of them.
You're right.
But I'm going to ask a question about your Article 43 recommendation, because I also agree that there's a lot that's that there's a lot of power that we pile into the president that creates opportunities for undue inflation, I suppose, of the president, of the executive powers. But you recommend that the electoral commissioner and his deputy should be appointed by the Public Services Commission. And the idea is to take away from the president the power to set up this important body that we must trust. But my problem with the Public Services Commission being the appointing authority or the nominating authority is that the Public Service Commission is under Article 70 completely appointed by the president. All of its members are appointed by the president. So you end up with a situation where we are given with one hand and taking with the other, really. I was wondering if you had considered whether what we can do to create a substantive check rather than a check that looks inform only. It's one of my problems with a lot of the provisions of checks and balances in the 1992 Constitution, that we give with one hand and then defeat that power by some other provision.
So when that power is given to the Public Services Commission, now the Public Services Commission must then produce a guidelines for the exercise of that power. How are they going to exercise that power? Okay. Now, so if we have those guidelines, we can hold the Public Services Commission accountable. But because we don't have those guidelines, or because they are not published, we are unable to hold them. So if we transit all independent constitutional bodies to the Public Services Commission, because these independent constitutional bodies are public offices anyway, so we transfer them to the Public Services Commission, then the Public Services Commission will be enjoined to put in place guidelines, a transparent system that can be monitored, that can be followed by all of us in the choice of persons to fill those positions. And then we will be building strong institutions.
So what will be our recourse if we don't like how the Public Services Commission is using this power? Because the electoral commissioner, once appointed, is almost who at least conducts themselves well is unremovable. So we may not like. So once we take it out of the.
So, doctor, what it means is simply that when those processes are published, and then the Public Services Commission violates or contravenes its very processes of appointing somebody to any of the positions so advertised or so listed, if the constitutional amendment goes through, then we have recourse to resort to the courts.
But this is the same court you're saying you're not comfortable with leading.
No, I'm not comfortable with the court interpreting the Constitution. I'm not comfortable. And it is not only, my discomfort is not only limited to Ghana. I have looked at the Roe and Wade case, and I think that where there is a general preponderance of the appointing, of the judges of the Supreme Court towards a particular political ideology, they might interpret constitutions to give effect to that ideology. That's why I'm not comfortable with them leading or providing the ingredients to clothe the skeletal framework of our Constitution. But in areas where they can use their prerogative writs, mandamus, certiorari, and all those to ensure quo warranto, to ensure that compliance or obeisance is paid to the guiding principles, to the principles established for the purposes of appointing people to public offices, we might be able to cure, or it might be a lesser evil.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Inusah Fuseini. And I can assure you that there are a lot more questions for you to answer. If you have patience with that, at the tail end, we will be able to bring you some more of the questions.